is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are, to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are, to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. Willingly we choose to surrender our lives. Willingly our knees will bow. With all of our hearts, soul, mind, and strength, we gladly choose you now. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are, to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come. Just as you are,
Well, good morning and welcome to Grace Bible Church Online. I hope you're all ready to get into the Word and just be close as a church family this morning.
Good morning and welcome to Grace Bible Church Silver Lakes Online. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Kristen Locke and I am the Director of Family Ministries here at Grace Bible. We are so glad that you're here with us. I do have a couple of new announcements for you this morning. The first one is we are looking to get our small group started again, and we will be doing that through Zoom. So if that is something that you would be interested in joining us through Zoom on your computer, please email office@gbcsl.com, and we'll get you into one of those small groups. The second announcement I have for you is we miss all of your faces. We miss seeing you guys every week, and something we would encourage you to do is to take a selfie, send in a video of you and your family saying hi to us at Grace Bible Church, just like this.
Hi, I'm Ellie,
I'm Manuel.
and we just want to say hi to our Grace Bible Church family. Hi.
Hi. Hi, we're the Winkies.
And we just miss our Grace Bible Church family. Hope you're all doing well.
Send your videos to office@gbcsl.com. Thanks.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, perfect delight, visions of rapture now burst from my side. Angels descending, bring from above echoes of mercy, whispers of love. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I and my Savior am happy and blessed, watching and waiting, looking above, filled with His goodness, lost in His love. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.
Sing that chorus out again.
This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.
You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fears. I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called
I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Sing it again. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears are drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I could stand and see. I am a child of God. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. Drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. I am a child of God. I am a child of God. Yes, I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Thank you.
Water you turned into wine. Open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you. None like you. Into the darkness you rise. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other.
Well, here we are once again for another week of Church Online as we wait for this virus situation to end. What I'm seeing in the world and in our country and in our community is people who are really struggling with a lot of the issues and concerns and fear and anger at the way things are going. So what I want to speak on today is the concept of overcoming fear. It's a debilitating thing to be afraid of what's going on around us. And I want to take a look at how we can overcome fear in a situation like this. But first, I want to take a look at the causes and the sources of fear in our situation here. So first, some observations, then some solutions. As I was thinking about this and thinking about how major societal events like this can shape a generation. This is going to shape our generation. I think back at previous things that have done that. I think about my dad who grew up during the Depression, and that shaped his perspective on things for the rest of his life. And I think of some of my uncles who were part of the World War II generation and served in that battle, and that affected who they were for the rest of their lives. And I remember when I was a young kid and in early elementary school, and every once in a while, they'd trot us out into the hallway, and we had to do duck and cover drills because of fear of nuclear attacks. I really don't know what that would have done, just kneeling in the hallway with our heads down, but hey. And then there were things like the Kennedy assassination that shook this country. You know, Bob Dylan just released his first #1 hit called Murder Most Foul, 17 minutes long, and it's the first thing he's done that went to #1, but it's about the Kennedy assassination. It's about the repercussions and the way it's affected this country and this generation, and he speaks of it as being the beginning of a slow decay. And in that same era, we had people who were very much shaped by Vietnam and the reaction in this country and the reaction of those who went overseas. And we had the civil rights movement. And the 60s were just a very big deal. And then we had 9/11, those things that you just remember where you were and what was going on in that time frame. And they shape who we are. And this COVID thing is going to be the same way. The virus and the ongoing complications will reshape us forever to some extent. And it already is. I did some math, and I want to give you a little perspective on some of these things, because I thought this was interesting. California has somewhere over 39 million people living in this state. So I started comparing the state's population to the COVID situation. And so far, when last I checked, we had 970 deaths, headed towards 1,000. If that rate continued for the rest of this year, we'd be running around 8,700 deaths from this virus. But then I started comparing that to some things. Do you know that the greatest risk of death, the greatest cause of death in this state is heart disease? And that kills roughly 60,000 a year. Second is cancer, which kills roughly 57,000 a year. So here's the math on those. You are 6.9 times more likely to die of heart disease than you are of coronavirus. You are 6.5 times more likely to die of cancer, because here's the number. Of coronavirus in our population right now, there is a chance of about 1 in 41,000 people that you will get the coronavirus. If you even project that through the end of the year at the current death rate, it is 1 out of 4,500 people that need to worry about this. Whereas cancer hits 1 out of every 700, and heart disease hits 1 out of every 670. So there are much more scary things in this world, and yet we're so frightened of this one. You know, and here's another element of that. In Colorado, at any rate, and I think California would hold to this to some extent, there are about half of the coronavirus deaths are in nursing homes with people who are already in very poor health. So if you project those numbers, you have a chance of about 1 in 82,000 of dying from coronavirus, just based on the math. You know, Vegas is getting ready to reopen because the Vegas mayor says there is a death rate of 0.5%, which is pretty low. And so maybe that can help put into perspective a little bit the fear that people are having over this. The rate of threat, it's not like it's 1 in 10, it's not like it's 1 in 20. It's 1 in 40,000. And this bothers me. You know, I was shaped by the 60s and 70s, so I just tend to distrust the government. I mean, that was the tone in that era. And, you know, especially when the government thinks it knows better than I do and knows what's good for me better than I know. And I remember Ronald Reagan saying the scariest words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." So I'm skeptical about some of these things, but people are worried. And in some ways, the effects of this are going to last for years, especially economically. There's people talking about a worldwide depression because economies are just being shut down. And we don't know what that's going to look like long term. It can be even scarier. There is talk of food shortages at this point. Smithfield Foods, which is a major pork production company, they closed at least 3 plants. And one of them supplied about 5% of the nation's pork, ham, and bacon. I mean, bacon. And so I want to read a quote from the director of this organization. He said, "The closure of this facility, combined with a growing list of other protein plants that have shuttered across our industry, is pushing our country perilously close to the edge in terms of our meat supply." And I want to show you this part here. He says, "It is impossible to keep our grocery stores stocked if our plants are not running." And it's not limited to meat. Farmers, agricultural farmers are hard to hit too, especially the smaller ones, like organic farmers. Here's a quote from a professor who had studied this. It says, "This is an interesting, extreme event to food systems because it's really just a social event. There is no weather shock, there's no infrastructure failure or shortcoming. Natural disasters tend to only impact a particular area. A hurricane may wipe out crops in Florida, for example, but the coronavirus has had a much more pervasive national and international effect. It's a different sort of disaster than normal." You know, you go into the store, and I can almost ignore a lot of these things, but I go into the store and I see shelves cleared out. And what does that do? It makes you want to make sure you get some while you can. You know, I remember going down the row at Winco, and everything on the left or right-hand side was pretty much gone. That was beans and rice and pasta and things like that. Left-hand shelves were full, and I looked at them, I thought, well, pickles and hot sauce and things like that. And I thought, we're okay, but if at some point that stuff starts disappearing because people may get desperate. The fruit industry is affected. The price of eggs has nearly doubled, and people are worried. People are worried, they're angry, and they're afraid. They're afraid of so many things. Prisoners are being released. Is that safe for society? Is that going to affect us in ways that we're not anticipating? And all this is affecting Christians directly. Especially here in California, Mendocino County up north said that streaming church services like this one are okay, but they ordered no singing. You can't have any singing during your online live stream church service because singing might spread the virus. They said it's okay if people sing at home. That's okay. But that's just, that bothers me. And then here's the statement that they put out. Violation of or failure to comply with this order is a misdemeanor punishable by fine, imprisonment, or both. So for what we're doing here today, if this was in Mendocino County, we'd be risking fine, imprisonment, or both because we had people sing. And so people are wondering, how much more of this are we going to accept? People are very concerned about our religious freedom. There are 3 Southern California churches, 2 of them here in San Bernardino County, who have sued the state of California and Governor Newsom over these coronavirus orders. They're arguing that this social distancing mandate violates the First Amendment right to freedom of religion and freedom of assembly. And the fact is that the church, I spoke about this at the beginning of the year, the church means those that assemble, those that get together. It is the assembly. And right now, we are forbidden to assemble. That right has been restricted. You know, online church has its place, but we cannot do what our name says we do. And people are getting a little upset about that. Now, it's okay. If it gets worse than this, it's okay, because the church tends to thrive under persecution. So it bothers me, and I'm not alone. People are taking to the streets in protest in many states: Virginia, Minnesota, Kentucky, Utah, North Carolina, Ohio. There's plans for protests in Oregon, Idaho, Texas, and right here in California in Huntington Beach. People are afraid. And there's a lot to be afraid of, and there's a lot to be angry about. And that's the other side of this coin, is anger. Because ultimately, anger is often fear-based. People are angry about the government overstepping. Why? Because they're afraid. They're afraid of government oppression. You know, they're afraid that our freedoms are being eroded. And you have to wonder, what if a lot of people take to the streets? Will the government try to shut that down? I've heard people worry about martial law, the military in our streets enforcing government decrees. Imagine that for a minute. No one alive here in the United States has experienced that in this country. But the people are talking about it. So, there you have it. Are you encouraged yet? No? Well, that's the problem. Anger, fear, worry. Now I want to address a little bit of what I think could be a solution. And the first thing is this: figure out exactly what you're afraid of, and then you can deal with the fear. Oftentimes we just have a vague sense of uneasiness and a vague sense of upset, and we haven't really thought it through to exactly what am I afraid of. You know, you're afraid of getting the virus, okay. Why are you afraid of it? Well, because you might die? I think a lot of people are afraid of death, and others are afraid of suffering, whether it's suffering from a virus or suffering under a government that clamps down more and more. And it's fear. And the problem with it is that we're afraid because we don't trust God very much. That's the bottom line. We don't trust God. And so we react in fear. I want to read you a little passage from the Life of Christ. This was written down by Mark. It's in the book of Mark, starting in chapter 4, verse 35. Here's the reference. You can look it up for yourself. I hope you have a Bible handy. If not, you can always download one or order one. But it says this: As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross over to the other side of the lake." They were on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, which is a very large lake. So let's cross over to the other side of the lake. So they took Jesus in the boat. The disciples took Jesus in the boat, and they started out, leaving the crowds behind. But soon a fierce storm came up, and high waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. But the disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" So what were they feeling? They were feeling fear in two areas. One, fear of death, because they're going to drown out in the middle of the lake. And two, fear that Jesus didn't care, that God didn't care. So Jesus woke up, and he got up and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the water, "Silence, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. And then he asked his disciples, "Why are you afraid? Why are you afraid of this situation? Do you still have no faith?" Faith and fear are opposite concepts. And for people who claim to be people of faith, there's no room for fear, at least not like we're seeing these days. The disciples were, oh no, we're going to drown. We're going to catch the virus. And faith is supposed to overcome this kind of thing. If you're worried, if you're fearful, if you're deeply concerned, where's your faith? Where is it? I mean, that's what Jesus asked his disciples. And we have to think as we sit and worry and we're afraid and we're concerned about these things, we have to think about what this common thread that runs through all of the Bible. In fact, Jesus in the book of Matthew says this, don't worry. Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? Can your worries, the things you stress over, can they add a single moment to your life? And the answer, of course, is no. But we sure act like it can. We act like our worrying is going to make a difference. Let me read you another reference. This is from the Old Testament, from the book of Psalms. And here's the reference. You can look this up later. But this will be familiar to some of you because it's a loved passage by many. And it says this, speaking of God, you made all the delicate inner parts of my body, and you knit me together in my mother's womb. Oh, that's reassuring to a lot of people, especially, when someone's pregnant and they think of that happening in their own body. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. Now, that is so beautiful. It's so full of meaning. But let's go one verse further. Verse 16 continues in the same vein. You saw me before I was born. And then listen to this. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. God's got this all planned. God knows what's happening here. But I feel like sometimes this is where our belief stops. Oh, we believe the first part, fearfully, wonderfully made, knit together in our mom's womb, and we kind of drop off on that part about every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. And so we try to do all we can to live as long as possible. We stay at home. We wear masks, as if we're going to show up at heaven if we die, and God says, oh, too bad. I had you down for another 30 years. Oh, that dang coronavirus. Your days were recorded before you were born. I mean, this gets awkward. Because understand that all the things we do in an effort to extend our lives, well, we're going to eat right, we've got to exercise, got to go to the doctor, got to take your meds, got to have surgeries, you got to shelter in place. Meanwhile, the Bible seems to say it's going to play out the way it's going to play out, no matter what you do. It's hard for us to internalize, and it's hard for us to live in faith in the light of that. Here's another reference. This is from the book of Job. And it says this. Speaking of God, you have decided the length of our lives. You know how many months we'll live, and we are not given a minute longer. And that's okay. I think of this life as being kind of like high school. When I was in high school, I thought it was my whole world. My friends, my social circles, the things I was doing, they were more important to me than my family was. I felt like I was closer to my friends than I was to my own family. And I thought, this is what's important. But it's not true. High school is just preparation for what comes next. And all those friends that I thought were so important, I lost touch of almost all of them. I had the wrong perspective on that time. And for those who have been in the military, boot camp's kind of the same thing, basic military training. You're immersed in this environment for a while, and it dominates everything you do and everything you think. But it's not the real military. That comes later. Boot camp is a temporary thing. It's just preparation. College is just preparation for what comes after it. And this life is just preparation for what comes after. We think this world is all of existence, but it's not. Real life is waiting for us when this one is over. And we need to think not just about the events of this world, but about what lies ahead. To go back to the school metaphor, death is just graduation. I think of it like this. Imagine a baby in the womb. I don't think that child would come out of the womb if it had a choice. But it doesn't have a choice. Birth is forced. Birth just happens. But the womb, rather stay there. It's warm. All the needs are met. It's the only world infant has ever known. But real life happens after birth. And it's the same with us and death. I want to read you a C.S. Lewis quote. I had come across this years ago, and I remembered the concept, but I couldn't remember where I read it. And then I recently came across it again. It's in one of Lewis's books called The Screwtape Letters. And here's the quote. The majority of the human race dies in infancy. And historically, that's been true. The majority dies in infancy. Of the survivors, a good many die in youth. And it's obvious that to God, human birth is important chiefly as the qualification for human death. Because death is the gate to real life. And the essence is this. Death brings us into the presence of God. So what are you afraid of? That you're going to die? And the problem is? The Apostle Paul started churches all around the known world in the years after Jesus lived. And he wrote to one of the churches that he had founded, a church in the city of Corinth. And this is in his second letter to them, 2 Corinthians 5. And he says this, so we are always confident, even though we know that as long as we live in these bodies, we're not at home with the Lord. For we live by believing and not by seeing. He says, yes, because of that belief, we are fully confident, and we would rather be away from these earthly bodies, for then we will be at home with the Lord. This is not all of existence. This world's not our home. We're just a passing through, as the old song says. And I want to read you this. This was in the press. There was a pastor in Virginia named Gerald Glenn. He was a pastor and a bishop in his church. He was 66 years old. And he got a certain amount of press this last week because a few weeks ago, he said in a sermon that God is larger than this dreaded virus. Which is true. But then he was diagnosed with a virus, and a week or so later, he died. And so the press jumped on this, and I just felt like there was a sense of, see, he said God's bigger than a virus, and he died, you know. But earlier in that same sermon, he said this, if I had to deliver my own eulogy, I would say God is greater than any challenge you and I face. That would be my epitaph. The media didn't understand, but Pastor Gerald Glenn was right. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. What are we afraid of? And yet there's so many now who are afraid to leave their house. You know, they harass people who aren't wearing a mask. We've had that happen in this church twice in the past couple of weeks to young moms. And one who didn't take her children into the store. They were out in the car. And somebody harassed her over that. And then we had a young mom took an infant in the store and people harassed her over that. It's like people are just on the edge. Why? Fear. We had that situation in New York where someone pushed an elderly woman because she was too close. The woman fell and hit her head and died. That's fear that produces those kinds of actions. And Christians should have nothing to do with that. You know, we see it with this hoarding thing. People go into the store and they're worried and they're fearful and you've got to stock up. And I hope nobody from this church is doing that. Because that's not right. That's based in selfishness. I'm going to get mine right now. And I don't care what anybody else needs. I got to get mine. That's selfishness. It's fear. And it's wrong. As a matter of fact, fear is sin. And so is worry. The Apostle Paul wrote this to the church in Rome. As in Romans 14, he says this: everything that does not come from faith is sin. So when you're out stocking up on stuff that you already have plenty of, that's coming out of fear, not faith, and that means it is sin. We're afraid of so many things. Some people are afraid of the government. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Reagan said terrifying words, but they're afraid of what the government might do and where this might go. They're afraid of oppression, or they're afraid of tyranny. They're afraid of the state controlling your actions or taking away your rights. You know? And I think that when this whole thing is done, we're going to see that the government has created at least some of this fear. Because even when these bans are lifted, fear is going to last. Some of you are going to be afraid to come back to church when they say that we can, because you're afraid of what might happen. And yet, over 60 times in the Bible, we read this: fear not. Do not be afraid. And what we tend to miss in this is saying, this is a decision that we make. Fear is not mandatory. Fear is not something that can be in control of us. It's a choice. It is a decision we make whether we're going to be afraid or we're not going to be afraid. Make the choice to not be afraid. And again, I think it's important to just figure out exactly what it is that you're afraid of. You're afraid you could die. Well, you know what? I promise you will. It's going to happen. Might happen now, might happen later, might happen out on the highway, might be from one of the much more common killers of cancer or heart disease. And anyway, ask yourself why you're afraid of death. Why are you afraid of death? Do you not trust God to be able to take care of you through that? Or maybe you're just afraid that you're going to get sick. Well, you will get sick too with something. It probably will not be coronavirus. And even if it is, most people recover. So what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of food shortages? That's scary to me. Food shortages. I've seen pictures of other countries where the shelves are just empty. What are you going to do? Soup lines. And my dad grew up in that. But then the Bible addresses that too. King David wrote in the book of Psalms, this was a song of the ancient Jewish people, had this line: once I was young, and now I am old, yet I have never seen the godly abandoned, or their children begging for bread. God's promise is that He will take care of us, regardless of the fear, regardless of the concerns we might have. Or maybe you're afraid of losing rights. And I got to tell you, that may happen. But Christians have lived and died under oppression since the beginning of the church. And you know what? God can handle it. He will bless you right in the midst of oppression. He will bring miracles to His people right in the midst of terrible circumstances. I am so thankful for a woman named Corrie ten Boom, who survived Nazi concentration camps, to come out and tell us that in the worst of those movements, God was there. No matter how deep the pit, God is deeper still. So what are we afraid of? There's a book called Fox's Book of Martyrs, and it was written in the Middle Ages and, around the 1600s. And it just accounts for, since the beginning of the church, all the deaths by persecution and torture and horrible things. And the fact is that sometimes graduation from this life is tough and it's painful. And yet the Apostle Paul, still writing to the Romans, says this: what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory that God will reveal to us later. And I got to thinking about that, and And back to the baby in the womb and thinking, I suspect that birth is at least a little painful, or at least uncomfortable for the child. The child is squeezed through this narrow space and pushed and forced out into an unfamiliar world that's bright and loud. And I think it's probably traumatic, but you know what? I'm not sure. You know why? Because I don't remember. We all went through that, but I don't remember it, and neither do you. That's the promise of God. He will be there. And what we suffer now is not even worth being compared to what God has for us. So don't be afraid. But at the same time, there is room for wisdom. And let's be clear, I am not trying to tell you what you should do. I don't know what you should do. I don't know if you should go out and protest. I don't know. Well, I know you should do this. You should honor the government. The Bible tells us to do that. Whatever they're putting out as guidelines, as a word of how we should do things, that's what I'm going to do. We will honor the government. We will continue to have our services online as the situation develops, and until guidelines are issued allowing us to meet, we're not going to meet. That's not fear, that's just a different element of honoring the government like the Bible tells us to do. But for now, I just want to say, push past this fear. Push past this anger. This is an opportunity to examine what you believe, what you really believe. The things you believe enough to let them shape your actions. The things you believe enough that they enable you to control your emotions when emotions try to take over. This is a time to reset, and this is a time to consider what's important in life. What is your source of confidence? What is your source of safety? Well, we're never really safe in that context. Things happen. God's in control of that too. Maybe it's your health, but your health will fail at some point. Maybe it's your family, but your family will not always be there. It may be the best family in the world. Your spouse may be the best one in the world, but they can't promise they will always be there. There's got to be a higher level of source of security than that, and a source of confidence. What is your source of confidence? Is it a pantry full of food? Okay, we got plenty of food. We're good until we eat that. Is it a bank account full of money? What's happening with the 401k? Is your security a closet full of toilet paper? I mean, that seems crazy. That seems silly. But we see it happening. People are getting a sense of security because they have enough toilet paper to last for the next 3 years. This is all kind of crazy, and it's fear-based. Let this be a time to nurture your relationship with God. Learn who He is. Learn who you are in relationship to Him. Turn your heart to God and see what it means to be no longer a slave to fear, because you're a child of God. Read your Bible, download one, order one. Start with the book of Luke or the book of John. Learn about the blessed assurance, the true confidence that comes from God, that this life is not all there is, and it should not be our ultimate focus. And contact us about being part of one of our small groups via Zoom and connect with people and learn a little better about who God is. And remember, above all, God's promise that He is in control of all that happens. He is our shepherd. He is the one who meets our needs. Jesus said that not even a sparrow can fall from heaven without God seeing. And then He says, you are worth more than many sparrows. One last reference. Book of John. Jesus says this, don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't allow it. Make the decision. Don't just give into it. You have a choice here. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. Would you pray with me? Lord, as always, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your assurance. We thank you for telling us enough about your plan that we know what you have in store for us, that you care for us, that you intend to bless us, and that there is something better waiting beyond this life for those who turn their eyes to you, for those who commit to following you, for those who yield to you and allow you to cleanse our lives of fear and worry and anger so that we can live this life in peace. Lord, we pray for all those who would desire that life, that you would help them to turn their lives over to you and allow you to produce those qualities within them, as I ask you, Lord, that you will do in me. We thank you for your promises. We thank you for who you are. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Remember, God is in control.
You are my shepherd, I have no need. You lead me by the peaceful streams, and you refresh my life. You hold my hand and you guide my steps. I could walk through the valley of death, and I won't be afraid.
Here's why.
Because you